it's important that you understand why this is called Behind the Curtain with Keith. When I was first learning about this whole world, I asked, what is it like inside? Because I was visiting personalities from time to time as they came forward, and as they would go back in, my question was always, what is it like inside? Is it just dark? Are you a feeling? Do you come forward? And it was explained to me, well, it's kind of like going through a curtain that separates us from the outside world. And I said, a curtain? And they said, yes, because you see, if we want to, we can come up and peek from behind the curtain. And some of the curtains are sheer and we can see through them. We can see you, but you can't see us. It's to help protect us. I said, oh, I see. Well, what does the guy have to do to get behind the curtain? They said, well, we don't know you well enough yet, but maybe someday we'll let you step behind the curtain. So they explained a principle to me. This is kind of what it looks like. If you could look down upon a person, okay, we're going to look right down on their head. And you've heard the expression, the whole world is a stage. We're just going to draw a curtain right here. That's what that represents. And there's one person who is forward in the body. That personality, generally speaking, is called the host. And it's very easy for that one to stay forward because, well, that's their job. And behind the curtain, you have others that are created for very specific purposes. Now, the number doesn't matter. Makes no difference at all. The reason I say that is because I have worked with systems, and I get our vocabulary right. A system is the mind, the body, the spirit, and how they work together. I have worked with systems that had just a handful, and I've worked with systems in the thousands. The number isn't what's important, although it is important to know that they're there, but the number is not the key in healing. What is key is their intention. I would much rather work with a system that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of personalities that all want to heal than a system that's got a handful of them whose purpose it is self-sabotage and don't want to heal. It takes a lot more convincing on those. But the whole concept of them being behind the curtain, that was a new thing for me. I look at it as if you're being invited into their world. And if you are invited into their world, they trust you. And they will explain what their world is like. So, what is their world like? Well, to them, their world can be castles. It can be just shades of color. It can be, I had clients that just had rooms, buildings with rooms, cities, towns, just landscapes. We called the world inside a mindscape because whatever the mind has created, that's what it is. Now, is there anything that's right or wrong? No, it simply is. So, if you notice, when I drew my diagram, some of these guys are outside of the body. Remember, this is the top of the head. And as stimuli comes in to the person's life, and it's something that the host cannot deal with, what happens is one of two things. Either somebody from behind the curtain steps up and superimposes themselves on this one and helps this one through the difficult circumstance. Or somebody steps up from behind the curtain and pulls this one out, and usually they'll go way over here and be completely unaware of what the experience is until the experience is over. And then when it's over, they will simply bring them forward. Usually when something like that happens, a person loses time, which means 2 or 3 minutes to 2 or 3 hours to, I've seen 2 or 3 years go by, and they have absolutely no recollection as to what happened during that time frame, and they have no knowledge of losing that time. But that's what happens in that circumstance. So, what does this have to do with quantum physics? Not a whole lot. So we're going to get into that next. Quantum physics. Here's the first blind man looking at the elephant. Quantum physics, the discipline of quantum physics. It can be a little bit intimidating because there's so much brain stuff to do with quantum physics, but it really isn't. The things that we need to learn about quantum physics are very, very basic for our discussions. It comes down to this. When I was in high school, the truth was that there is matter and there's energy, and matter can be turned into energy, but not the other way around. Well, we have since become more scientifically sophisticated, and we have proven that that is not necessarily true. Matter and energy can be the same particle. That particle that I'm talking about is a photon. Studies have been had where photons basically are the building block of everything. Everything, whether it's energy or whether it's matter. Now, when a photon is at rest, it has no mass. I might be getting this backwards. And when it's moving, it does. When it's in motion, it is a wave. When it is stationary, it becomes matter. So it is the only thing that can be both matter and energy at the same time, depending upon what it's doing. Well, here's another cool thing about a photon, is it seems that it has an ability to choose. Fermi Laboratories did a lot of studies with photons where they would take a photon and shoot it down a vacuum tube, big vacuum tube, and give it a series of choices to make, different gates that it can go through. And it seems that the photons could choose for themselves which gate they wanted to go through. And to make matters even more curious, it seemed that photons were interrelated. And that brings into another phase of quantum physics called photon entanglement, to where one photon seems to understand what another one is doing, whether it's anywhere in its vicinity or not. So what this has to do with all of this is really simple. A photon seems to be able to make a choice. If it can make a choice, then it stands to reason, in order to choose, it has to be able to store information, and it has to be able to act upon that information. So photons become the building blocks of everything. And if you could communicate with a photon and ask it to reason with you, maybe it might make another choice. Let me give you an example. Early on, I was trying to understand the principles of light and energy, and this whole idea of being able to communicate with the intelligence of a photon. And I thought, what would be really cool is if I could put all of this together in a seminar format, everything that I'm learning, and we could do it like a rock concert and have laser light shows. And I thought, I just wonder what does a laser cost? Now, this is back in the mid-90s. And so I looked it up and I got a hold of a guy up in Salt Lake City and gave him a call. And I said, hey, listen, I'm kind of curious and want to know about lasers. And he says, well, I can tell you what you need to know. What do you want to know? And I said, well, the first thing I'd like to know is, what do they cost? And he said, well, entry level is about $30,000 for what you want to do. And I said, I thought to myself, well, there goes that idea. It's certainly not in the budget. And then I asked him, how do they work anyway? And he said, a laser, it's really very simple. All we do is communicate with the intelligence of the light and ask it to do something. And I said, communicate with the intelligence? And he says, yeah. I said, how do you do that? And he says, well, let me give you an example. It has to do with wattage. You can take a 100-watt light bulb and just light it up, and now you've got 100 watts of light going every which direction, plus the heat that it puts off. And with that, you could take a piece of foam rubber and put it on that 100-watt light bulb and unscrew it. I said, yeah? And he said, well, with a laser, what we're able to do is communicate with the photons of that light and line them up in a row. And all we need for them to do is line up with intent, and they will actually burn their way right through that foam. I said, 5 watts? And he says, yep, that's about right. I said, how do you do it? And he said, well, we do it electronically. And while he was explaining to me how they communicate electronically, my brain is off somewhere else going, wow, think of the concept. If you could just communicate with the intelligence of something and ask it to choose again, why, you could heal. And then it occurred to me, that's probably how Christ did his healing. When he came upon the withered hand, what he was doing basically was communicating to the intelligence of the hand and asking it to choose a different existence. And if he can do that with that, or changing water to wine, all that is communicating with the photons or the intelligence of the water and asking it to rearrange itself to where it is now wine. Well, if you can communicate with that, wow, what a concept. Is it possible? Well, that road took me down the metaphysical route, and I started learning about energy work. And I interviewed this energy worker and that energy worker, and dozens and dozens and dozens of energy workers that I interviewed. And they all told me basically the same thing, and it came from different disciplines. As an example for our purposes, I'll use Reiki. You ask a Reiki master, what is Reiki? And they will tell you that it is universal life force energy. And then you need to follow up and say, well, what do you do with it? And they will tell you that with their intention, they ask the intelligence of whatever it is they're working on to make a new choice. And I thought, wow, this kind of goes along with all of the other philosophies of setting your intention and putting it out to the universe and then receiving it in kind and back. And my thought from there was, I wonder if Reiki is a good language to use to communicate with intelligence. And if you can, how hard do you have to focus to be able to do that? And then I learned that not only is Reiki a good discipline, but there's other energy working disciplines out there. There's emotional release disciplines out there that do a wonderful job communicating with the intelligence. And then there's certain principles that are at play as to where the energy goes and how to be responsible for the energy that you're releasing. And all of these thoughts were swirling around me, trying to come to a conclusion. Then it occurred to me, if everything is created by photons, and photons are the building blocks, then that means alter personalities are created by the very same thing. And if you could communicate with them and ask them to make another choice, well, then the healing process can be sped up. If you go through conventional methods for healing, there is a process called an abreaction. And what an abreaction is it is the reliving of the trauma that created the alters in the first place. And it's usually done under hypnosis, and quite honestly, the body and the mind don't know the difference between when it happened previously and that it's happening now. To the mind and the body, it's as if it's happening now. When we were faced with the reality that it was going to take 10 to 15 years for my wife to heal, because we had to process all this energy, it just didn't make sense to me. It didn't make sense. And I then learned a principle, and I learned this through energy workers as well as the alter personalities of many of my clients at that time. This is what I learned. I learned basically that through everything, through every one of us, there is like a highway, if you will, of light, or a light path that goes this way, and it 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 goes this way. In other words, there's no end to the directions that it can go. But this light highway is routinely called the grid. So there's a grid work that works through all of us that light and photons travel on. As an example, the light coming from the studio that reflects on my face is bouncing off of that and going into a camera lens, which is being processed and coming to you. That is all intelligence that has chosen that route. And of course, it has been persuaded to do that by some electronic wizardry and people who are far more knowledgeable on how to do that than I am. But the point is that an intelligence is behind it, a photon, and it travels through a grid work. So when like energies come together, there is an attraction. And when dissimilar energies come together, there is a repelling that happens. And you've heard this: birds of a feather flock together. Like minds think alike, or great minds think alike. This is all because energy seems to be attracted to each other according to frequency. So what does this grid work look like? Well, if you ask the energy workers, they'll tell you it's kind of a pale green, and everything goes in a straight line, and it's every which way, it goes every which way. If you ask alter personalities who are behind the curtain, they tell you the same thing, pretty much. Except they will tell you that it changes colors depending upon the frequency that is coming down that grid. So in other words, an emotion, such as anger, comes with a red hue to it. Okay, and anger is a different color than passion. And that's why when you do aura photography, you can see all of these different colors, because those are different frequencies that are, for lack of a better way of saying it, hanging out on the grid, waiting for their purpose. So let's take a look at that for just a second. And I apologize for the artwork, but it serves our purposes. What we have is energy is processed through the body. Most people are aware of chakras, okay? And chakras are zones, and there's 7 main ones, and then inside those chakras there's meridians and other chakras within the chakras, and it can get very complicated. And if you're really interested in that, look up any good book on energy work, Reiki, well, any good book on energy work, and they will show this to you. But what we learn is there seems to be, and again, it depends on the disciplines, different levels. And some disciplines will tell you that there's 3 levels times 4, and others will tell you that there's 4 levels times 3. Nonetheless, it seems like that 12 is a magic number. And what these are levels that go out into your auric field. And in fact, when you get out to the very outside of your auric field, there is a shield. And it's been described to me this way, that it's as if there's a big bubble around you, and the shield is in particles of light that are in a hexagon shape, so that they're flexible and they can withstand trauma and that sort of thing. And they breathe, so energy leaves your auric field and it comes back in. In fact, when I explained this, one lady said, "Oh, you're talking about the apostles and the disciples." And I said, "Apostles and disciples?" And she says, "Oh, yes. One side is the apostles because they're going out, and the other is the disciples because they're bringing energy in." I said, "Okay, I can go with that." So, what does this have to do with alter personalities? Here it is. Where do they live? Are they a construct of the mind and they're just in your imagination? Or are they out on this grid? The answer is yes, to both of those. More importantly, depending upon what they're holding and what their purpose is, that has a greater determination as to where they are. If they are holding a negative energy, such as hurt, pain, sadness, grief, something like that, chances are they will be out on the grid. And what that looks like, and I'm not going to draw the 12 levels, is you will have personalities that hang out here. And chances are really good that those personalities hold a negative charge. They hold on to a negative energy that could not be assimilated and processed by the body at the time of the abuse, or I should say experience. So they're outside the body, they're within the auric field, and we have our grid work. And we're just going to draw one dimension for our purposes here. Our grid work that goes through everything. These personalities have the ability to come out here on the grid. And like I mentioned, the number is not nearly as key as what they do. So this became very evident to me early on when I was helping people. I had a client who, when she would come, she'd ride the bus because she was legally blind. She could only see by about 8 to 10 feet in front of her. And in fact, she had 2 personalities that helped her navigate. One sat on her right shoulder, one sat on the left shoulder, out in the auric field, and they would help her walk and help her find her way. Incidentally, both of those personalities had 20/20 vision. She didn't, but they did. And so she came to my office one day, and we were about ready to go into a session, and we were going to step behind the curtain and see what was happening with alters that we knew were there and that we've been working with. And she says, "Keith, somebody wants to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, let him come forward. Let's talk." And they came forward, and when they came forward, they shook their finger at me and they said, "That was a bad thing that you did with your son." And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, he didn't do it and he got in trouble. And you need to apologize to him. And I said, okay, I will do that. How do you know? And they said, well, we were watching you. We've been watching you for months. You don't think that we would come here and see you if we didn't trust you, would you? I said, no, I guess not. I guess not. Thank you for letting me know, and I will deal with it later when I get home. And I did. And you better believe I did, because I knew that if I didn't, the following week she was going to have somebody else there to report on me. And then it occurred to me, I wonder how often this happens, because we have people who have this situation with alter personalities that have personalities on the grid all the time. So, a couple of other instances. Once I flew into Seattle and was picked up by a client, and she dropped to the ground and she started crying, and I said, what's wrong? And she says, it's you. And I said, yeah, are you okay? And she said, you don't understand. She didn't say one of my personalities, but she said, I saw you and we've been watching you, and they came back and she said the same ones that told me that you could help us came back and described you to us as to what you look like. And it's you. And I've had clients that came into my office, and when they came in, they reached up and they touched my face and they said, oh, I can't believe it's you. It's you. And I would say, yes. By this time, I knew what was going on. They said, yes, I would say, yes, it's me. And they say, oh, you look just like what we saw in a dream. And this happened over and over and over when I was doing this full time. So, how does that apply in other applications? Mothers have a tendency to know about their children. Whenever a child is in trouble, they seem to know it. Other instances, and this doesn't necessarily involve an alter personality, but you're just thinking about somebody for a while, and then all of a sudden the phone rings, and there they are. Or there's lots of videos about manifesting, where if you think about something with real intent and you put it out there on the grid, notice they say the grid, but you put it out there to the universe, it will come back to you. Scripturally in the Bible, cast your loaves upon the water and it will return sevenfold. So we have this concept, but until I was allowed to step behind the curtain and get an explanation as to what it looked like, I had no idea as to the mechanics, as to how it's done. Those are the mechanics. Probably the most important principle about this. If energy can travel along the grid, why would it be necessary to bring negative energy into the body and have it processed when you can process it out on the grid and spare the body? It can be done. It's done all the time. And that process and how that's done is the fuel for a whole nother video, which we will get to in the future. Now, these videos are designed, and the intent is that that one builds upon the other. We get a glimpse of the elephant here, and a glimpse of the elephant here, and a glimpse of the elephant here, until we can finally link them all together and create an elephant. My intent is to help as many people with this information as I possibly can. So, if you would like, comment, and subscribe. Your comments are read, and they become the fuel for For podcasts, there is absolutely no way that I can explain all of this knowledge in these videos without creating more questions. And because of that, I've developed a podcast. So you can go to our website, stepbehindthecurtain.com, and comment there. You can comment at the bottom, and those comments will end up on our podcasts. And the idea is to help as many people as we can. So please share this video, and we will see you on the next one.